Hi, today we're going to be installing the R1200 2014 and newer DUSAC Passenger Backrest. And we're going to start with the installation by just going over the tools. The first tool we have is a T30 Torx, a T20 Torx, a number 3 Phillips screwdriver, a 10mm nut driver, and a 5/32 Allen wrench. These are all the parts that are necessary for the install. We have the 2 spacer blocks that basically keep the unit from moving back and forth on a luggage rack, and I'll show you that in a little bit. The front bracket, which mounts on 2 existing bolts that are on the unit right now, and then the rear bracket, which fastens back here. The first order of business is to remove the factory seat, which we've already done, and we're going to use the T30 Torx, and there's 6 bolts that use that. There's 2 here, 2 here, and 2 underneath this cover here. These 2 bolts we've already removed, and they're the T20s. You pop this cover off, and it makes it real easy to get access to these rear bolts. And these rear bolts are what we're going to be bolting this bracket to. This bracket is the only one that's necessary to remove anything to put on. After the fact, we'll show you how easy it is to install the rack afterwards. Okay, we've loosened all the bolts until they're all just about coming out. And now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the 2 rear bolts. This is what the front bracket of the DUSAC backrest mounts to. And we're going to remove the 2 bolts. And then we're going to add 2 spacers, the 2 white spacers. And they have an angle to them if you just follow the angle that's already there. And if you get a little bit closer here, you can see how they're angled and what position they go into. And we're going to lift the luggage rack up and get this bracket installed right in there. So then I'm going to add, Now we're going to install the 6 by 50mm bolts along with the 6mm flat washer on it. I'm going to insert things back in here. And we're not going to tighten these all the way down. We're going to go through and just so they're just touching. Then I'm going to go up front here, tighten these. And these. More advanced people have air tools in order to do this, not hand tools. But at any rate, before we tighten these completely down, what we want to do is we want to center the spacer blocks. And what we're going to do is drop them in. Of course, the left goes on the left and the right goes on the right. We're leaving this bracket a little bit loose so that when we put the shorter bolts that are, after you're done with them, you just basically throw them in your collection or throw them out. But you're just going to snug the 2 blocks, get them started. If you can't get them started, move the bracket so it does start in there. And now the blocks are locked in place, locked into the rack. Now we can go ahead and tighten these down. The next step is after we get done tightening the rear bolts, is just to go back through and snug up the remaining bolts here, here, and here. And of course we're going to put our cover back on. There's 2 little tabs that go in here. Do not force this cover, it's very easy to break. But slides in the grooves in the back and just basically snaps right into place. We'll put the two T20 screws back in, and we'll snug them down. and put the seat back on. Okay, so we've gotten the factory seat back on, and don't forget to hook back in your heater. If you have heated seats, there's 2 plugs to plug in the heated seats again. We now have our front bracket of the backrest installed, and it's permanently in there. It's going to stay in there forever. And once again, I'd like to bring up the fact that you can put a factory trunk on this, and this bracket will not hinder the install of any factory BMW trunk. Now to install the backrest, fairly easy. We have the blocks, again, R for right, drops in place. The left block. These blocks keep any kind of movement, side to side, front to back. They're permanently locked in position. Once they're set down in there, they're like puzzle pieces. And they also prevent you from over-tightening the factory rack and inadvertently cracking the factory rack. So they act as a spacer to keep that from happening. We've thrown both blocks in place. We have the rear bracket, and I always recommend putting the rear bracket in ahead of time. That way you can see where it, because sometimes this is a little bit of a snug fit, but it goes right in there, and just let it set against the tail light. We're going to bring the unit over, line up the holes, and we're basically just going to put the 4 screws in. The front screws, of course, 2-inch, and it's obvious the back ones are the 1-inch screws. Just going to stick our hand underneath there and push up on the bracket and get the 2 screws started. And I always recommend, because there is movement to this bracket back here, but no movement to the front, as what we do with the K1600, we always tighten the front bolts first. Snug them down nice and tight. Like I said, you can't break the factory rack by over tightening them. And the 2 rear bolts. And we're all set.